I brought this point all the way down to the plane that's the bottom of the chassis. Side windows are going to be polycarbonate. So the bottom one is going to come into place and be bonded in and then have some tabs that hold it. If I would have just slowed the heck down and put less heat in it, it wouldn't have warped. Doctors, they can't even sign their name worth a damn. How are they supposed to do surgery on a person?
Ain't got time for that.
Ain't got time for that. What's up, people? Welcome back to the King Zero V12 supercar build here today. Actually, this week I thought we'd take a break from doing, the time lapse and basically all the guys goofing around, kind of like a Seinfeld episode, because I know there's a lot of hardcore people that want to see exactly what is going on with the sheet metal fabrication, the coach building, what's going well, what's going badly, what do I got to fix, what is it takes a bunch of time, so you guys can really learn, because there's a lot of people out there that want to do it as well. Plus, absence makes the heart grow fonder, and our boomer and friends will all be back next week. So we will get back to silliness. But actually, next week is going to be insane! Insane! Jabberwock Jack Wagon V10 Viper build unveil will be next week. I'm so excited about that, you guys. It's going to be a big deal. I probably shouldn't have something be such a big deal with the King Zero going on. And it's a good thing this car is as far along as it is, because it'll kind of pale in comparison in a lot of ways. So that's basically that. But I want to show you. So come on in here, guys. Let's get a little bit closer. I'm just going to kind of back up. Let's start with the general. So there's a number of things about this build that are good and bad. And when I say bad, I just mean not magically ideal. So the first thing is that coach building and doing something out of steel like this requires an incredible amount of time. Even if you're rocketing through it as fast as you possibly can, it still requires time so as not to get too much heat in it when you're welding and warp things, to get the details right, to keep eyeballing it, to getting up off your knees, up and down all day and moving around and grabbing stuff and eyeballing it and like looking at pictures of the original one and flipping through it and going, how did they build that thing? How do we do this? And it's difficult because it's frankly uncharted territory. People have been coach building cars similar to this for a long time. Obviously the 1920s through the 1960s, that was how you built really cool cars like this. But this is not that time, and those people are not around. And I'm just an internet jackwagon doing this for the first time. So it's important to realize that there's still craftsmanship. And so, for instance, myself, as well as Jacob, and everybody there, a lot of the things that we're doing are for the first time. So we have to draw upon our experiences in the past, or at least know how to think through it to get the job done. So if you guys all remember, going way back to the beginning of this was the tool that I made to find points in space from the giant pictures. So I took the pictures, blew them up with the projector I borrowed from my in-laws. And by the way, the doggone projector stopped working when I had it, which is very frustrating because then it makes me look like an idiot. Sorry, guys. But anyway, so projected them full size for the wheelbase that I needed, drew it out so then I can get the points. So that would give me my points in space. So a drawing is two-dimensional, so I'd get 2 points out of that. And then I would just have to find the corresponding point on another drawing that shows you the other axis. So that's why I had, and you can still see remnants here of the dotted lines and points when the chassis was in the floor. So you'd find a point in space on the flat plane of the ground. Let's say it was right there where that intersected. And then let's say the point you wanted was about 2 feet off the ground. Well, then here's your point, and you gun sight it. So using this tool allowed me to get this relatively symmetrical and find all the points. And by doing that, I used this technique that I cobbled up in my head. And this is important because it'll tell you guys where, frankly, I underestimated just how difficult it would be. And weirdly enough, I overestimated how other coach building techniques would be, which I'm going to get to. But come here and look at this. So, and you're gonna see the ugly underpinnings of the dirt that got swept under the rug. So come on right over here and have a look. So this is 1/4-inch cold rolled steel. Okay, now the nice part about this is I can just take this cold rolled steel and weld it straight to a roll cage or the chassis. So this is going to be seamless in a way, a big art piece. Okay, I don't care about taking the body off. If it ever gets hit or hurt, guess who's going to fix it? Me. And no, I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time making panels removable so I can replace it if I'm going to race it. Probably the car will never get hurt or dented because guess who's going to drive it? Oh yeah, me. So I can make it be a pretty art piece. So that's how you find it there. Now, and then finding these points in space, I could take the cold rolled steel, which a lot of you remember from the early days, and gently bend it, whether I literally take it on my stomach and kind of bend it this way, or roll it in some rollers, such as over here. You'd take the cold rolled steel and you'd find the angle you want. And sometimes I'd take those pieces of wire and I'd put them up on the drawing and see if it's about right. So for instance, all of the edges of the body, all the edge of the wheel well, every single thing darn near got a piece of that wire. And come on back, I'll show you. So for instance here, you can still see it's exposed on the inside. So this panel we made, and you fill it in. So you took a piece of paper and you cut it out, and you get it to where you need. You cut out the paper, and then you take it over, and you put it on a piece of flat steel, and you transfer it, and you cut it out as best you can. Then you bring it over. The problem is the flat steel is flat. And if you just bend it in space, that's a simple curve. It bends on one axis. However, even a car like this that looks like it's all folded paper still has compound curves. That's what makes it so difficult, because they're subtle. So if you look at the roof here, this is a compound curve. It sort of looks like a Beetle's wing. And I don't mean a Volkswagen Beetle, I mean an actual Beetle, the little buggy kind. So this was very tricky to do. And this particular panel, Jacob slowly rolled out on the English wheel, which actually is very time consuming. Because an English wheel, you got to pass it through a zillion times to get it a subtle curve. And truthfully, while it looks good on the camera, I'm sure, this has some wave to it. It's not perfect. And to get this car perfect, just by the steel, it would take another 2 years, which we don't have. So we're doing this car to like a 95% standard, if that makes sense. Because if you get the metal within 95 or 6% standard, and your filler, even just being up to an 1/8 inch thick, will take care of the next 4%, I don't really give a crap about the 1% tolerance. You know what I'm saying? Because we'll get it done in a much more reasonable time and have a really cool car we can drive. So that's kind of that. And then here on this seam, you can see, this is an early one. I was struggling with a number of things of getting it together, also the heat. But the nice part about this is what we've shown you guys in some previous videos of different kinds of dollies. And this is just a real solid piece of steel that doesn't dent easy, that I can hold to have a mass behind it. And there's some different shaped ones. And then of course you've got your body hammers. This body hammer has a dead flat, doesn't have any curve to it. So as an example, so like you see, let's see this dent right here. Do you guys see this? It's a nice soft dent. I mean, I could just put filler right over it, but you can, you know, we're going to want to push that out. Now there's a few different techniques, for instance, on this. So this metal is pushed in, but I need it to push out. The easiest way, and I really should be using a different hammer. I'm being lazy. Don't do as I say, not as I do. Yes, that's what all old people say to kids. So I'm going to use literally the dolly inappropriately. There's going to be a bunch of old timers going, "You're doing it wrong. You're a stupid YouTuber, derp." Okay, fine. Anyway, so I'm going to literally use this now, sort of aggressively. This is the stupid way. I'm just getting the metal. I just don't want to dent it in that much to start with. Okay, so it's there and it's got some things going on it. So come on over here if you don't mind, sorry. In this dolly, let's see if I can get it to go down in there. What I'm going to do is I want the metal to stretch just a little. So that's all I'm going to do right now, but I want to show you. So the beauty of this is, if I've got an area that's low here, and I can't really get behind it to hit with a hammer, but I can put a dolly there and put a lot of pressure on it. If I start hitting it with the hammer in the right spot, every time I hit it with the hammer, that metal will stretch a little. And when you're pushing the pressure from behind, the stretching, when you push behind, is going to force it to come up. It's going to start poofing out the way you want it to. So that's a little bit of the example, the technique I was using here. Also, I was using this subtly to tap down the dent, but there has to be something behind it so it doesn't bounce. And of course, this isn't welded here yet, so I can only do so much. So there's a lot of interesting techniques with the metal that isn't just what you see. You don't just hit it and dent it in or out. You're subtly shrinking and stretching the metal. And I know that sounds crazy, and the only thing I can say is, when it's time for you to do this project, and you just sort of see a few things and get it, it'll then make sense. So I can't easily explain that to you. You might just have to do your own project. So in doing that though, a super important part of this build is process thinking. And the reason why things like this And for instance, with Genius Garage, when I teach students with race cars and such, one of the most important things you get out of this is the ability to process think. So for instance, right here, here's the wheel well going in, and you can see it's like stitch welded in some places, and that's steel, and it's in place, and it's great, whatever. And I chose to do the inner wheel well to where it doesn't actually come all the way to the fender. There's an air gap, just in case I need to get behind it, plus I didn't want it warping the fender and stuff. And this more than encapsulates the entirety of the wheel if you're in rain or dirt or whatever. But we made this piece some time ago, but we couldn't yet put it on because I wanted the ability to get behind this outer fender to make sure the curve is about spot on before it goes on, because then I'll lose the opportunity to easily get behind it. So that was something that was important. I can still get behind it here, but that's something you have to think about. And the other aspect to this is too, and I gave Jacob crap the other day because one day I saw him over there and he had a rag with WD-40 on it, and he's like, here I go! And he was cleaning it, looked great, and I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you making my life difficult? Because if it's not going to flash, if it's not going to rust, don't put your stupid paraffin-based oil crap on it. I still have to paint this and weld on it. And even just the super tiny residue of the WD-40 on it was jacking with my ability to weld it nicely. So those are things too that get difficult. And with a project like this, it's fun, but it can be stressful if you want to keep it going, because just the tiniest thing can cause you a lot of time and heartache. And I'm going to give you another example right here. I hate to admit this, but I might as well just show you all her flaws. So come on down here. So this panel here, okay, is pretty darn nice. It's got a little bit of a subtle wave to it, and I like it. So right here's the edge. I still have some more grinding to do on this to get it real smooth and perfect. But anyway, so here's the edge here, and this was cold rolled steel before. And then I've got it, you know, carefully sand it with a flapping wheel and everything, get it right, and then file it to make it nice so you have your edge. And this lower piece, I had made that before, and this came out really, really nice, okay? And then this had to be welded on afterward, because the screen will go in here and the taillights and all that jazz, but there still needs to be here. The trouble was, for whatever reason, I put in too much heat. I started to, over here, and it started to warp it. Just a little bit, and it warped, and I'll tell you the reason why it looks really crappy, but right here there's a dip, and right here there's a dip. And I can no longer easily get behind it to form stuff, so we could only get it so good easily. And what sucks about that is that's where this just required more patience. If I would have just slowed the heck down and put less heat in it, it wouldn't have warped. But because I warped it, I had to put a bunch more time into it, and we never got it right. And you know Jacob's magic shrinking disc, where it's like this angle grinder with a big disc on it, and you put a bunch of heat into it in a small area and then put a rag over it cold with water? It's not magic, you guys. It only worked so well. In fact, I stopped him from trying to use it in some other places where we can still get behind it with a hammer and a slat file, because the nice thing about a hammer and a slat file is I have the ability to slowly control exactly what's going on. Whereas if you're putting heat into things and quenching it, not only you're starting to make it go through heat cycles and you're changing it, but that is more difficult to control. And none of us are practiced enough to make that perfect. So that's why this looks a little, frankly, kind of crappy, because we tried that and it wasn't enough to make it work. So I had to get behind it as well as I did and bring this up, and I'll be perfectly honest, after I smooth this, I'm gonna get it a little bit better, but it is gonna require a little bit of filler. And that annoyed me. Not because it won't look perfect, and there's just amazing products on the market today. So this is gonna need, honestly, right there is gonna be probably an 1/8 inch of filler. Is it the end of the world? No. Will the car look amazing when it's done? Yes. Will it last? Yes. Will everybody think this car is amazing? Yes. But there's gonna be some annoying old timers on and be like, I could have done it better. Would have taken me 7 years just to make that one panel, and it took me 80 years of my life to figure it out, and I have absolutely no space for you to learn because this is your first one, but I could have done it better. Well, good for you, man, but I gotta get it done. So I'm just kind of throwing that out there because as a note, and I know that sounds salty, and yeah, okay, I'm a little salty about life, because now I'm on the internet and I hear everything from everybody, and my camera guy is smiling because he thinks it's funny. He watches my show and he knows the salt and why it's there, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, he does. So anyway, I'm gonna tell you about Ferrari in the 1950s. Okay, so nowadays, rich people love them. They're like, yay, Ferrari, it's like the new Fabergé egg, and I can go to fancy car things and feel important, and I can put my money into that because I've already done everything I need to in life, so I'll pay whatever for Ferraris that are vintage. So anyway, Those cars were crap when they were new. They were hammered together really fast, planishing hammer to go racing, go do dangerous stuff, and they're slapped back together, and then they would corrode like crazy. They were handmade stuff to go racing. And they were never symmetrical, and they were never that nice. But what's happened over time, when the things become very collectible and therefore very valuable, then the people want to restore them and make them as pretty as the cars make them feel. This is a subtle dig. Was that okay, camera guy? That wasn't so bad. It's kind of a diplomat. Hey, that was a Winston Churchill insult, okay? So anyway, they make the cars as pretty as the cars make the owner feel, which frankly is way prettier than the car ever was, or the owner probably should ever feel. Sorry, but it's true. And they're over-restored and they're perfect, because if you got a car that's worth $50 million, you can pay some old guy $50 an hour for years to make it more perfect than it should be. Ain't nobody got time for that, especially not me. I've got to go racing and do cool things. So I'm doing it more real old school. Whip this thing out, let's get it done. Yes, put the stuff on it, make it work. Now, that's all well and good, and there's going to be people out there, Casey's a hack, he doesn't know how to build cars, what a loser. That is what literally every mechanic and fabricator and painter and everything in the world does. In fact, on that note, I'm going on a salty tangent. You know all those super fancy car people, detailer people that do paint correction? There's no such thing as paint correction. The paint's on there already. If there's orange peel and there's enough thickness, they're wet sanding it and polishing it out. Back in the old day, normal people, it's called polishing and maybe ceramic coating, which do with the Avalon King. It's just fancy words for people trying to feel more important than the other guy to take more money. Okay, Casey, move on. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. This is steel, and steel will rust, and that's annoying. The other annoying thing is, if you look right here, please camera person, the cold rolled steel thing I did is great for getting all the points and putting stuff in place and painstakingly make this thing replicate the general vibe of the art that it once was. However, it can be prone to rust if I were to drive it in water, because there are now, if you look kind of, can you see toward the inside of the panels and stuff in there, or maybe even look down in here where it's sort of ugly. If water hung out in here and sat, it would eventually find itself in all the little cracks and stuff and rotted, okay? Which, okay, stop looking at it. Don't look at it. Don't look at it that much, camera guy. Now, I just want you all to know that I built in the ability for this to rust on purpose, because I really, really want it to be like an actual Italian car. Those things fizz like an Alka-Seltzer tablet in the rain. But no, in all seriousness, that's why these things are that way. And the thing of it is, if I were to build another one of these in this technique, I would probably use some of these same techniques in building the car the same way, but there are other things that I could do differently. For instance, instead of putting the wire rod right here and bringing the two panels together, I would probably take a piece of metal and put a bend in a sheet metal brake and then just subtly shrink in the metal to get it to curve the way I want, and then weld the flats together rather than doing it at the edge. But in many ways, what I'm doing is sort of the best way to do it, especially since I'm going off of drawings and doing this for the first time, where I want it to reflect art of gone by rather than me just making a car however I feel like it. And because of that, because of the constraints of trying to emulate a certain style of art, it makes it more tedious, and I kind of need that process. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. And as an example, the cars that we all see from like the 50s or early 60s, before they got with crazy design like this or got an aerodynamics, and as a note, what I mean when I say that is coach-built carts, let's think like Jaguar D-types and C-types, or even Ferrari 250 Testarossas and such. Those cars had compound curves, and they were kind of bulbous and smooth like this. Now, this car is not made out of metal. It's a completely different technique, so don't think that. I'm only using this as the shape as an example. And the truth be told, something like this shape is in many ways easier to do than the car I'm doing, because if this car was built out of aluminum like it was built in the 50s or 60s, you'd have a wire edge for your wheel well and the edges, and where the door is, you'd do your frame, you'd bend your metal and you'd bend it and you put it all in place and it would be on a buck, and then you just got to fill in the metal. You just get it in the English wheel and you curve it and you wiggle it out and you move it around and you bend the aluminum. And it's kind of easier, because the truth of the matter is none of those cars are symmetrical. And if you look, and it's harder to tell they're not symmetrical. Whereas this doggone thing, it's nothing but lines. And the human eye is really good at seeing 90-degree angles and parallel lines and 45-degree angles and stuff. So this darn thing was kind of a nightmare to get it symmetrical and perfect, and it's still being so. So that was where I was sort of wrong when I built this. My initial thought was this will be a great first car for me to coach build because it's so flat. I can just get all the edges right and then just barely roll it and it'll be fine. Wrong. In some ways, those aspects are easier, like making these panels not that difficult. And this particular one that Jacob was doing is the most difficult panel in the car. And he was being kind of a masochist and just wanting to make it out of one piece of metal instead of making one piece here and having a seam, which would have been a lot easier. But he's doing a good job. But he could have done it easier a different way. I'm gonna catch hell from him when he watches this for seeing it, but it's true. So, because he was working on these for 3 days. Actually, I cut him off when he wanted to work on it for a 4th day. I'm like, dude, we still have to finalize this and finalize this. They're gonna move. Stop. You're building something for something else that's gonna change. So we moved on to something else to work together. But it's insanely time consuming and difficult. The positive aspect of it is once you're in a project list, you have to finish it and you have to do a good job. So it forces the proverbial you, i.e. me in this circumstance and my friends, to rise to the challenge to get it to be awesome with all these details. The difficulty of that is it ends up taking more time, hence why it's taken so long. But the car will be done this summer. It's going to be really exciting. Now that I've gone on that dad lecture that you didn't ask for, come on over here. I want to show you some other things. So this panel here and this panel here, Jacob nicknamed the apertures for whatever reason because they were open before. I locked in this area here. I made this channel metal and gave it the curve it basically needs. And I'm a little frustrated with the side on the left side, and I'll give you an example where I screwed up. This piece here had been on the car so long, and then Jacob had cut off these panels and did a real good job, and then I went and tack welded them in place. But I went and welded them in place without eyeballing and making sure this was still fine. But the problem is so much time had come by, people were leaning on the car like this enough that there's a support area here. This area got pushed in an inch. So then I looked at it the next day and I'm like, it looks like garbage! Gah! So then I had to cut all the tacks and we had to move it. It was the only way. And then truthfully, it's still pushed in about back here because we went so far putting the car together and not checking that it hadn't moved and not checking that it was still lined up, that's the way it's going to be. And so we would have had to take so much apart to do it. It would be like if you were being a seamstress and stitching a shirt or pants or gloves or something, and like one finger on the glove got off, and the next thing you know, they were all wrong, and you have to take the whole thing apart. So, what are you looking at? The camera guy's giving me crap. What you call me a girl because I know seamstress stuff? Are you talking about your actual patients? I'm going to edit this, but my camera person today is actually a doctor and surgeon, and he made a joke that requires editing. We're going to move on. It was a really good joke, but the general populace can't handle life or the truth at all. They go insane, run around like their hair and hands are on fire, and then try to destroy everybody's life because they haven't discovered this thing called humor in life. What? Don't mouth it. You can just say it. I got the mic.
Sorry, dude.
Sorry, dude. Doctors. They can't even sign their name worth a damn. How are they supposed to do surgery on a person?
Ain't got time for that.
Ain't got time for that. Whatever. Anyway, so here you guys can see this piece of metal here, this little straight piece, and you can come in close. This one here and this one here. This is for where the windows are going to mount the edge. So this still needs to have a little bit of a radius, and so does that. These are just tack welded in here initially to get it right, nice and flat. And so the window here. The side windows are going to be polycarbonate. So the bottom one is going to come into place and be bonded in and then have some tabs that hold it. And this one, of course, is a little different because on the original car that inspired this build, the windows could slide back. There's a bit of a problem with that in actually executing it. The window shape is actually trapezoidal. So if you had the trapezoidal window and you had tracks that came back like this and you slit it, they'd come out of the tracks. Or if the tracks were real deep, the window would be floppy by the time it gets back. The other issue with doing that is, and if you kind of come, why don't you go to the front and look in from the back, looking from the windshield. If you can see this roll structure area here, this is a bulkhead and your cockpit's here. But back here's the engine bay area. So I still have to put in a firewall, and if your window slides back, it's got to go beyond the firewall back into the engine bay, or you're going to have this big deep pocket for the firewall. And neither one of those I want to screw with. Now, I'm going to be honest, this car is going to be kind of a hot box because you're laying underneath a giant window in the sun, so it'll probably be horrific in the summer. Let's just be honest, even with an air conditioner. So the side windows here, they're polycarbonate. I'm going to do some sort of airplane or race car-like slide to let air vent out. So we'll see on that. And I know you guys have a lot of great ideas and we've thought about them, but it's kind of tricky. So I want the art to be right. Obviously this car is going to be a little racy, so we'll just have to see how we end up executing that. But we did get the flashing on here and that's going to be bonded in. So I'm pretty happy with that. And actually it makes me feel really good that we're to the point where the windows can go in. I think the lid opens out right now. It doesn't hit anything. Another issue with the nature of the lid here, you guys can see the form for getting the curve right. The lid is correct in its form from about here back, but this weird phenomena happened. And I tell you what, if you can go over on that side, camera person, and look, I want you to look down this line toward me. Look straight down this like gun-sighted sort of thing. And dear internet algorithm, that's for me to look and see if something's right. Don't actually get triggered. It curves. It's dipping. It shouldn't be doing that. I actually worked to make it dip upward. I'm not frankly sure how it ended up doing that. There really wasn't a heat thing. So it's not really easy to bend anymore because it's all together. So I'm probably going to have to slit some of these areas to make it bend upward and then re-weld it. And I'm also going to have to do that here. So I'm going to have to take probably a whole day in getting the lid finished and exactly contoured right, because this lid and the lines that carry all the way from there are so important. And if they're off, if it gets a little too flat right here, I can't fix that with filler. And it'll throw the whole car off. If it's right on, the car will look amazing. If it's off, it'll look like crap. So that has to be right on. I still have to get the edges here, and then these gaps here have to be filled. And then the next thing that's going to be really time consuming, guys, and I've been kind of not avoiding it, but these channels, Jacob and I did these early. He made these a long time ago, and we painstakingly welded it to the rod. This moves, okay? So it's going to have to be slit and relieved of tension to be brought in so it meets up perfectly to the lid. So I got to do the lid, get it perfectly, and I welded two little stops on here so it can sit, and it's going to have to be adjusted. So this lid has got to be in its exact right place, and then all the channels then have to be moved around and welded so they are rock solid perfectly in place. Because the second you start welding, because we've got the panels and everything to go on here, but I can't weld that on or even tack it on until this is finished and this is locked in place perfectly, which is painstaking. And from there also, you guys look right here, this is the top of the shock tower. And you know, take a look and see how close this is. The adjuster I can take off, and there's a fair amount of room here, so you can slide it and get your camber adjustment. But I still have to cap this area off, and it's going to be somewhat painstaking to make this area out of steel right here. And then, you know, make it so things aren't sharp and all. And the adjusters don't have to stay on the car, but I still need them to see for clearance. So that's an example. Like this still has to be capped off. And then this channel has to have sheet metal to go from this channel here to this tube. So that's got to be cut out, welded the whole way, and finished off nicely, because right now it's all open air to the wheel wells, to the cockpit. And it's not the most difficult thing in the world, but it's very time consuming. And then finally, if you want to come around to the front here, I'm going to show you the biggest screw up on here. Actually, it's a very small screw up that turned into a physical, very big screw up. The nose. When I was doing drawings of this car and looking at the art, I was looking at old pictures, and I found one old drawing on it. But the old drawing on the car that I found that was like an engineering drawing, you know, like top, side, front, all that, was done in, it was like a bootlegged Russian engineering drawing of the original Italian car. So when you get the Russians a long time ago, get the Russians to bootleg a copy of something Italian from a long time ago and then try to use it, you're proud, and then blow it up, it's probably not going to be any good. And where I'm going with it is, the bottom of the chassis, the physical bottom of the chassis is down here. And I wanted to put a splitter on this car and a wing for more like the track version. So when I found this point here, for where the front of the nose would come to, the wheel well would come to, I brought this point all the way down to the plane that's the bottom of the chassis. The problem with that is the design, the art of these cars and what Gandini did, which I was trying to emulate the flow of, you get your opening at the front, and then that point in space, this is kind of the art of it, has to carry on and then imaginarily go all the way to here, and it has to flow. But this also wraps underneath. So the visual aspect of how the eye picks that up is very important. So long story short, this point actually has to be more like up here. I got to bring that up. This fender also needs to roll in a little more. It needs to tuck in a little bit more like that. And then lastly, if you come over here and hold the camera up high and look down, and I've talked about this before, I got it too wide. This needs to come in, I'm going to say 1.5 inches, this point here. Which from this point in the fender, and that's why we couldn't do these panels yet that Jacob was working on in terms of welding. We didn't have the gutters done as well as the fender, but right here, this is going to have to be slit. And assuming I can make all this work and still use this fender thing and not redo the entirety of the bottom of the nose, this will get slit and brought in, so this will carry in the line better. Because if you go just over a little bit, you can already see how the line of this kind of comes in real nice and sort of tucks in like a trim waist, and it looks nice, and it sort of comes to a point, but then this really comes out and it doesn't come in enough. So this also needs to come inward and just it'd be balanced. You know, you see it in the insect world, you see it with fish, the design of that and anything that's really good. So it's just wrong. It comes down too far, it needs to tuck in more, it needs to come up more, it needs to go in more. And I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to do of that without completely removing all the bottom panels and changing it. And the chassis down here, if you can see, and kind of maybe come stand where I'm at and then look down at the footwell. The footwell, where your feet are up here, the chassis goes down another 5 inches right about here. So your feet are actually upward a little bit, kind of like a, I don't know, mid or late 90s Formula One car. Which is good because there's not that much room between where the windscreen is and your toes, but it does work out well. But on the original car, the chassis didn't go down that low and the bottom could come to it. So there may have to be a little bit of like a kind of a bulge going on down there, which that word will probably also make my dirty-minded doctor friend start giggling. Yeah, this is why I've got image stabilization, because he's laughing right now. Why are you laughing, Scott? I don't know, okay, anyway. So that's something. There may have to be like a bulge down low to be able to get the body work of it to work well. But also with the kind of, saying the word bulge, the protrusion down there in the car's pants, I can put some sort of scoop on to at least get some cool air ventilated, although it'll be so close to the ground, you get nothing but rocks and marbles and bugs and stuff in it, which would actually be hilarious. But it's all part of the fun. And then of course for the headlights, you guys, it's got LED light bars which will go behind to illuminate. And I don't know why a bunch of young people have super overly excited for pop-up headlights. We're not going to put pop-up headlights on this. They wouldn't look as cool as you think. They would be kind of dumb. It's a lot cleaner the way they did it, just being a bar, so that's what I want to emulate. Pop-up headlights are neat. They were from a time they pop up and they look cool, but they're an aerodynamic nightmare. So not going to do that, not going to do that. Maybe in some other design if I'm feeling kind of 80s funky. So that's pretty much that. The last thing that I did too that I had to change, if you want to kind of look, maybe through here is fine. If you guys recall, this car is kind of an aerodynamic nightmare. And originally they put the radiators in the back, like back here. And then the engine bay had the louvers pointing upward to bring air in from the top and then go for the radiators in the back, which isn't like ideally efficient because it also got the heat of the engine, nothing flowing around. It's not ideal. So for a number of reasons, I put the radiator in the middle because I had room, and I'm gonna bring the air from underneath the car and kind of follow the flow of up underneath the butt and back of the driver and occupant to the radiator and flow out like a normal car, which works okay. I did it on the Omega car for efficiency over there. I added this section here to make that curve more gradual. Right here we had this line here, and over there is where it used to be, and it was too sharp, and you wouldn't get a smooth flow of air up into the radiator area, and it would start tumbling and create a big void. So it would have been able to cool with fans on it, but it never would have been efficient the way it should be. So I actually changed that, even though I didn't feel like putting in more work. So I think that's gonna be really good. With regard to the driver compartment, it's not gonna have seats that bolt in because that's dumb. You basically are gonna lay down it and gonna be channels. So actually kind of what I'm thinking, you guys, is this area here, I will be coating all the metal and, you know, painting it so it'll be corrosion protection and such. But basically this lower area and where the tube is, I'm gonna fill this with expanding polyurethane foam down here in the bottom, and I'm actually gonna carve that out so that it creates the channel and the contour for where the driver and the passenger will sit. And then of course that'll get high, you know, high density upholstery type foam like this over top of it. And at the right density, it's gonna be very, very strong. It's gonna be very light. I can contour it. And then this will be on top of it. And effectively you'll lay in that. And then of course it can be stitched with the cool style and all. Sort of the time period upholstery that you'd see in a lot of Italian supercars of the 70s, maybe early 80s and that sort of thing. So, and it's also simple and it'll work really well. I'm not the kind of person that likes to find overly complex solutions where there's a better, simple one. That's supposed to be good engineering anyway. So that's what's going on, guys. You can see what's going on over here too. In a manner of speaking also, I should also point something out. I like to dog on a lot of supercars in the past because people think they're magical things of lore when they're not. They're just overly complex art pieces from long ago. As an example, the Countach, it's kind of not that great of a car in reality and driving. It's not that fast. It's sort of delicate. It's sort of overly complex and it's sort of hard to work on. But it's beautiful and it was an icon at the time and everybody loves it, even though it's a cantankerous monster. And I can say that. I've had one and I've worked on them. This car is also sort of turning into that because it emulates the same process of building of the time period and that sort of one-off art building. So I'm just trying to be a little bit mindful though, since it's my car, of making something that's serviceable. And then of course I am using the BMW V12 engine that's from a later time in history, from the early 90s. Hopefully has a little bit better development and was in a car that could go hundreds of thousands of miles and whatnot. So things like that, the brakes and whatnot are a little easier to replace. So I expect this car to basically need zero maintenance for the rest of its life other than oil changes and stuff. Aside from being coach built like it was back in the day. But I just want to give the opportunity to show you guys and walk you through it. No, it's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. It really is an art piece. It's not a car I really want to drive in rain. It's not a car that I really want to do any one thing with. It'll be really amazing about 2 days of the year when it's not too sunny and it's not too hot and you're driving somewhere that's not too congested and you don't have to worry about seeing too many things. So it's obviously a very extreme car, but that is what makes it fun. And I hope that this inspires you guys to take on a project. Maybe don't be a freak like me who's a YouTuber and has too much time to build some crazy car that is biting off more than oftentimes I can chew. Maybe you just use your first opportunity with an English wheel, or maybe you just get yourself a sandbag and some hammers and get the right aluminum that's a soft alloy or steel, you know, a sandbag like this that you can pound on and make it and hammer it out. Maybe you make a head fairing for your Mazda Miata. You know, head fairing, look it up, like a 1930s racing airplane or a 1950s car, sort of bears it back. Or maybe you make one for a Z3 or something. That's a great place to start. Or the other thing too is, there's lots of cool, cheap motorcycles to buy used on places like Facebook Marketplace. Get something that's got good bones that runs, strip off all the dorky looking stuff, and maybe make yourself your own tank and some really cool fairings and stuff, and start there. And then one day you too, if you do a really good job and you figure out how to come out ahead, well, can start building cars too. So that's it, guys. Got to subscribe. Lots more coming up. Next week's going to be insane. And I'll catch you next time. Very cool thing happening right now at the Packard American Motor Company. They're debuting their very first watch. This is the 1899 Model A. It's a mechanical automatic movement with a beautiful stainless steel case. All the parts are made in Switzerland. It's assembled right here in the United States. If you happen to have a Packard, you can get your serial number engraved right on it, but you guys need to go to packardamerica.us. This particular watch is mine. I'm looking very forward to wearing it more. It's frankly very comfortable, one of the best watches I've ever had. But this one's mine, not yours. You can't have it. Get your own. packardamerica.us.